Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the way we label historical figures, the clear heroes and villains, maybe it's a bit too simple?
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating how often the standard stories, especially about people with huge wealth and power, kind of gloss over the complexities.
Exactly. We get these neat packages, but what if the narrative itself, like the one about America's early industrialists, the famous robber barons, what if that story needs a second look?
You're teeing something up here.
I am, because today we're diving into a book that does exactly that. It challenges that narrative head on. It's called The Myth of the Robber Barons.
Ah, Folsom's work.
Yes, and that's a really crucial point to make right up front. You might see the name Forrest McDonald associated with it, and he did write the foreword, giving it a serious intellectual nod.
A significant endorsement, for sure.
But the arguments, the analysis, the core thesis we're digging into today, that's Burton W. Folsom Jr. We need to be clear, it's Folsom's research we're examining.
Absolutely vital distinction.
Yeah.
And our goal here isn't just to, summarize Folsom.
No, not at all.
We want to really dissect his arguments, look at the strengths, and their definite strengths, but also shine a light on the criticisms and limitations. It's about giving you, the listener, a balanced view of where this book fits in the bigger picture of history writing.
And just a quick note as we get started. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Right, so Folsom's main argument, it really hinges on this central idea, this division he creates for entrepreneurs during America's big industrial boom, say 1850 to 1910.
Okay, what's the division?
He splits them into two groups. First, you have the market entrepreneurs.
Market entrepreneurs. So the good guys in his view.
Well, Folsom argues they succeeded the right way through innovation, making things more efficient, actually giving consumers what they wanted, better products, lower prices. Think competition.
Okay, innovation and efficiency. And the other group?
Those he calls political entrepreneurs. And these are the figures Folsom says built their fortunes differently.
How?
Not so much by winning in the marketplace, but by leveraging government power. Think subsidies, special monopoly grants, or manipulating regulations to block competitors, what he calls regulatory capture.
Ah, regulatory capture, where the industry kind of controls the watchdog.
Precisely. So this split, market versus political, that's the absolute bedrock of his challenge to the traditional robber baron idea.
An idea heavily pushed by Matthew Josephson back in the 30s, right? With a more critical, almost Marxist lens.
Exactly. Josephson's book was hugely influential in painting these figures as mostly exploitative. Folsom directly confronts that interpretation with his framework.
So it's a fundamental reframing, and has this framework, this market versus political distinction, actually stuck? Has it influenced how historians think?
It really has. I mean, even critics often concede that the framework itself is a useful analytical tool. It pushes beyond that simple good guy, bad guy, captain of industry, robber baron thing.
It adds nuance.
Definitely. It forces historians to ask how the wealth was made. Was it through genuine market processes, voluntary exchange, meeting consumer needs, or was it through political favors, special privileges, basically using the state to gain an edge? That's a much more sophisticated question to ask.
Okay, so let's talk strengths. Where does the book really shine? You mentioned compelling case studies.
Yes, that's a major plus. Folsom doesn't just talk theory. He dives into specific figures, people like Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, James J. Hill.
And he uses them to illustrate his point.
Right. He presents them as examples, particularly Vanderbilt and Hill, of market entrepreneurs succeeding through competition and efficiency.
Can you give an example, like with Vanderbilt?
Sure. Folsom highlights how Vanderbilt took on Robert Fulton's steamboat monopoly. Fulton had this exclusive right, granted by the state, to operate steamboats on certain routes.
So government-backed advantage.
Exactly. And Folsom portrays Vanderbilt as the market competitor who came in, offered better service, lower fares, and basically broke that monopoly through sheer market force, challenging the politically protected setup. It's a powerful story to back his thesis.
That makes sense. And you also mentioned it challenges Josephson directly.
It does. Folsom really goes after what he sees as the uncritical acceptance of Josephson's interpretation, especially in education. He criticizes how textbooks often repeat these, in his view, oversimplified anti-business narratives.
Is that a fair critique of textbooks, do you think? The oversimplification?
I think it touches on a real issue. Textbooks have to simplify, but sometimes that means nuance gets lost, and one particular viewpoint can become dominant without students realizing it's contested.
So the book has educational value, too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's written in a pretty accessible style. It's not dense academic prose.
Hmm.
So for students or just general readers, it's a good way to encounter these economic history ideas and, importantly, to see a direct challenge to a common narrative. It encourages critical thinking.
And does this framework still echo today? Does it help us understand modern business?
Absolutely. That distinction market versus political entrepreneurship is incredibly relevant when you look at business-government interactions now.
Like with tech giants or energy companies?
Exactly. You can ask the same questions. Is this company succeeding because it's innovating and outcompeting everyone fairly? Or is it benefiting significantly from favorable regulations, government contracts, lobbying efforts that stifle competition? Folsom's lens is still very much applicable. It makes you look at the process of success, not just the outcome.
Okay, that covers the strengths, but like you said, any big challenge like this draws fire. It's not the whole story.
No, definitely not. And this seems like a good point to pause and reflect. As we shift to the criticisms, it's a moment to consider how historical arguments are built, how they're questioned, and how that whole process deepens our understanding.
Right. And for more discussions like this, exploring complex ideas and critical analysis, you can always check out our Mindful Moments content over on our YouTube channel.
So, turning to the critiques. Probably the most common one is about selective evidence.
Meaning he picks the data that fits his argument.
That's the accusation. Critics argue that while the evidence supporting his market entrepreneurs looks strong, he tends to downplay or even ignore evidence that complicates the picture evidence, showing those same figures perhaps engaging in less savory practices or practices that look more political.
So it might not be the full picture of even his heroes.
That's the concern. If you're only presenting the evidence that confirms your thesis, it weakens the claim that you're offering a truly balanced historical revision. It starts to look more like making a case than conducting an open inquiry.
And that ties into the framework itself being maybe too neat, too black and white?
Exactly. The second major critique is that this sharp market political divide just doesn't map neatly onto the messy reality of the 19th century.
Because real business involved both.
Very likely. Most successful industrialists probably had a foot in both camps. They competed fiercely in the market, innovating, cutting costs, sure. But they also likely lobbied politicians, sought favorable regulations, maybe tried to get tariffs that helped them. The lines were blurry.
So Folsom's categories might be artificially separating things that were actually intertwined back then.
That's the argument. It makes the historical reality seem simpler than it was. And related to that, there's criticism about how Folsom engages or perhaps fails to engage with other historians.
What do you mean?
Well, the debate about the robber barons wasn't invented by Folsom. There's a long history of scholarship with major figures like Alan Evans, Thomas Cochrane, Hal Bridges offering their own complex interpretations over the years.
Serious academic work?
Right. And critics say Folsom doesn't really grapple with the nuances of their arguments in sufficient depth. His treatment of opposing views can sometimes seem dismissive, rather than representing a deep, scholarly dialogue.
That's a significant charge for an academic work. Then there's the elephant in the room for some critics, ideology.
Yes. Look, every historian has a viewpoint. Yeah. Nobody writes from a purely objective vacuum. That's understood. But Folsom has very strong, clear, free market libertarian viewpoints. He's associated with organizations that promote those views. And some critics argue that this strong ideological commitment sometimes seems to drive the historical analysis rather than the other way around.
So the conclusion might come before the research, in a sense.
That's the concern raised, that the desire to validate a particular economic philosophy might compromise scholarly neutrality. Again, we're reporting this critique, not endorsing it, but as a recurring theme in reviews of the book.
And that connects to methodology, right? How the evidence is used.
It does. The critique isn't usually that Folsom invents evidence. He uses primary sources, data. But the argument is about interpretation. Does the interpretation flow naturally from the evidence in an inductive way? Or does the evidence seem selected and interpreted to fit a pre-existing theoretical framework?
Starting with the answer and finding evidence to match it versus letting the evidence lead you.
That's the methodological concern. It potentially violates that core principle of historical inquiry where you follow the evidence where it leads, even if it complicates your initial hypothesis.
And stepping back, how does Folsom's work fit into the broader scholarly landscape today? Has the debate moved on?
It definitely has. Modern economic history is way beyond just good guys versus bad guys. Historians now look at a really complex mix of factors: technology, market structures, laws, regulations, access to capital, entrepreneurial choices. It's all interconnected.
So Folsom's binary is seen as maybe too simplistic for current scholarship.
It's often viewed as a starting point or one specific lens, but not the full picture. Also, when you look internationally, the American experience, while unique, wasn't entirely isolated. Comparative studies show that mixing market savvy with political influence was pretty common for successful entrepreneurs elsewhere, too. Folsom's focus is very American-centric.
Okay, one last critique often mentioned is the tone. You hinted at this earlier.
Right, the moralizing tone. Folsom can sometimes portray the market entrepreneurs as almost heroic figures and the political ones as villains or parasites.
And historians try to avoid that.
Generally, yes. The aim is usually to understand why people acted as they did within their own time and context, with the pressures and incentives they faced, rather than just slapping modern moral labels on them. Explanation over judgment, you could say.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the myth of the robber barons, how should we ultimately view it?
I think it's fair to say it makes a valuable but definitely limited contribution.
Valuable because?
Because that market political entrepreneur framework is genuinely useful. It added a tool to the historian's toolkit, and it did influence later work. And his challenge to the simplistic, often negative narratives found in some textbooks, that definitely sparked important conversations and highlighted a real issue in education.
But limited because?
Because of those significant methodological concerns we discussed, the selective evidence, the potentially oversimplified framework, the way it engages with other scholarship, the possible ideological filter. These things weaken its claim to be the definitive revisionist account.
So maybe not the final word, but an important voice.
Exactly. It's probably best described as a revisionist polemic. It's a strong, pointed argument challenging the status quo, driven by a clear perspective. That's useful for shaking things up and stimulating debate.
But it needs context.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be read in isolation. For students, for anyone interested, it's a great, accessible way to see an alternative viewpoint on American business history.
But read it alongside other works.
Definitely. Read it alongside more comprehensive, balanced histories that grapple with all the complexities and nuances of the period. That way you can weigh the arguments yourself.
Makes sense. And remember, for more deep dives like this, analyzing different perspectives on complex topics, you can find more on Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel and explore our podcasts.
We hope this discussion gave you a clearer sense of Folsom's book and the ongoing debate around these historical figures.
Absolutely. We encourage you to explore further. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis related to today's discussion. And please subscribe, share, maybe purchase the book via the link if you're interested. And always, always think critically.
And maybe leave with this thought. How do the stories we tell ourselves about the past, about how wealth and power were built, how do those stories influence our thinking about the economy, about regulation, about opportunity today?
That's a great question. What other myths, historical or contemporary, might be shaping our views without us even realizing it? What truths are maybe still out there waiting for a closer look?